Welcome. I'm really glad to see some of you here tonight. I love the community that's grown up around product management over the last couple of years, last 5 to 10 years. It was definitely not there when I started out, and there are a lot of topics that we cover. There's some things that you see every once in a while, and some things you see over and over. And empathy is something that comes up over and over. But when you're dealing with an enterprise space, when you're dealing with companies, it's a lot more complicated, because I don't really know how Walmart is feeling on any given day, and I don't think Target's ever going to get pissed off at me. So we've got to figure out a different way to approach it, because companies are still made up of human beings in all of their messy and emotional and brilliant glory. And so we have to make sure that we're still focusing on empathy. So I've been doing product management now for about 20 years, which is scary to think about. And I've been in both the B2B and the B2C space. So you can see some of the companies I've worked at here. And over the last 6 years in particular, my focus has really been around cultivating empathy within the B2B companies that I've worked at. So I spent 4 years at NetSuite, a couple of years at JobVite, and I recently joined Box, where I head up the regulatory and compliance product management group there. And so I've made plenty of mistakes over that time. Most of them I've only made once. I do learn from my mistakes. So my goal here is to share some of the mistakes that I've made with you and talk about what I've learned from them and the techniques I've developed in order to avoid them, so that you can go and make some original mistakes of your own instead of repeating mine. So first off, I want to talk about one of those mistakes. And this is actually a fairly recent one. This was only a couple of years old. So first off, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what JobVite does, because I know a lot of people haven't necessarily heard of JobVite. JobVite is an applicant tracking software provider. And so basically, the company produces software from what we used to call it first look to first day, from creating a talent pool all the way through to onboarding. And a big part of creating a talent pool is gathering lists of people who might be interested in working for your company before you ever have a requisition for them. And one of the ways that our customers would do that was by using our job alerts tool to sign up. And the job alerts tool has a CAPTCHA, like many tools do. And that CAPTCHA in a career fair environment starts looking like a denial of service attack to Google. So they start saying, okay, well, I need you to check I'm not a robot. Well, I'm going to ask you to select everything that has cars. Actually, I'm going to ask you to do an audio CAPTCHA. And the problem with that is it turns unusable in a career fair environment. So what I did, because we had complaints about this, created a feature that allowed customers to turn the CAPTCHA off for a period of 4 hours and then would flip back on immediately after that, so that we could still have the protection without having to worry about the customers getting annoyed during the time of the career fair. Simple, easy, great, right? Not so fast. Day of launch comes, I get immediately contacted by a customer who tells me the people with admin authority to turn off the CAPTCHA in the settings page are not the same people who go to the career fair, so we can't use this. Oh, crap. All right, so show of hands, how many of you have had that exact same oh crap feeling before? Oh, come on. Everyone who's not raising their hands is just blocking out the pain. You're just blocking the memories, because it's happened to all of us. Luckily, in this case, the story doesn't end in tragedy. In the next release, we were able to create an update to the feature that allowed them to schedule the CAPTCHA turn off for the future. And our customers were very happy with that result. But the incident was a stark reminder that remembering who I'm building for, making sure I'm gathering the right kind of data and feedback, and checking it along the way aren't principles that I can afford to abandon even for an instant. But all too often, particularly within the B2B space, companies don't even start considering those principles in the first place. They're so focused on, well, we got to make the next sale, or we have to drive to this particular strategy, that they don't take that step back to focus on how they can develop empathy with the individuals associated with the companies that they're selling to. We make a bunch of big mistakes that can kind of be characterized by a series of questions that we forget to ask. First off, we forget to ask, who am I building for? So we, without thinking about it, we'll make a choice about who we build for, and we inadvertently piss off one person when we're making another person happy, rather than making deliberate choices there. We don't really stop and think about the right kind of data we need in order to make a decision. And in particular here, I have a sometimes unpopular point of view that we focus too much on quantitative data. And we forget the richness that qualitative data can provide us. And then finally, we forget to think about how we can get kind of ongoing empathy injections. In other words, how do we make sure that we aren't going off track over the course of a project? Because projects can last a long time. And we need to make sure that we're, keeping those connections, that we're not veering off course. So let's talk about how we can handle making sure that we ask these questions. The first one, probably coming not as much of a surprise to anybody. When asking who you're building for, personas are crucial. And I do want to level set on what we mean by personas. There's generally agreement on this, but let's take a simple example that's a little more consumer focused. Now you know what my son's going to be for Halloween this year. But if you talk about who am I building Halloween for? Take that guy, masses of candy, epic stomachache the next morning. Getting to run around in the dark with a flashlight and wearing a costume, of course. But you know what? If I'm building Halloween for dentists, candy goes away, the stomachache goes away, which is probably good. The costume probably stays, but you know what? Even the walking around in the dark may actually go away because you could fall and break your teeth, right? So this is a fairly simple example. And in the consumer space, it can often be that simple. When I was at Shutterfly, we actually had one persona. And she was a woman in her early to mid 30s with 2 children, income in excess of $80,000 a year. I think she was blonde, and I know she painted her toenails in neutral color. So it was very specific. But it's a lot more complicated in the enterprise space. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Box before I actually administer this quiz. So Box has 97,000 customers. 69% of the Fortune 500 is a customer of Box. We have such widely divergent customers as the International Rescue Committee, National Basketball Association, the Department of State. Now, it really depends on how you count. This was basically taken off of some documentation as I was trying to gather things together. And it's actually complex enough when you get to 14 that we're looking at, like the design team right now is looking at other ways to manage our personas, because that does get a little unwieldy. How do you make decisions about who you're building for when you're prioritizing across a list of 14? But it's not all that far outside the realm of possibility for that to happen for any enterprise company. So let's talk a little about how personas might multiply. First off, let's just start very basically, simply with the user. Let's go back and think about all of those Box customers. Financial services companies are big customers of ours. So a financial services consultant. But then what about a pharmaceutical company with a drug developing MD? Very different mindsets, different use cases, different mental models. They're going to be different users, and they're probably going to have different goals. So you already have the potential for multiplication of users, of personas just within the user base. But then take a look at administrators, and this is one that I see people kind of forgetting a lot. An administrator is a completely different kind of persona. Their goals are different, their skills are different, and basically their focus is configuration and maintenance as opposed to accomplishing a task. And administrators often have a lot of power in a company, so you don't want to ignore them. But then what about the buyer? The person who writes the checks? Not usually the administrator in large companies. The buyer often is someone who doesn't even log into the system. But yeah, it could be finance, it could be the chief information officer, it could be the chief information security officer. Speaking specifically from my Box experience, but at JobVite, chief HR officer. I'm sorry, but your average CHRO is not logging into a recruiting system. When they interview somebody, they actually will send their feedback in an email, even if they've just shelled out for an applicant tracking system. I have seen it many times. So that covers the people within the company, but it extends beyond that as well. So going back to that financial services example, if you've got a financial services professional who is using Box, for example, to share financial data with someone. You've got a customer that has, this is my financial plan for you. These are the outcomes of the last quarter of the stocks that I bought and sold for you. They are a vital and integral element of your overall story. And if you don't understand how your product is playing into your customers' business goals with their customers, how do you know if you're building the right thing? And then finally, don't forget about professional services in your own company. Your average enterprise product is not implemented with the flip of a switch. And so what happens when PS gets involved? Are they manually configuring the same thing every single time? Are they working with an admin console that looks like it was built in the 90s? I've encountered more than one company where that's the case. So all of these personas are absolutely vital. And if you carefully consider them all and build for all of them at all times, you're going to build crap. Yes, it's important to understand all your personas, but it is equally important to know who you're building for and make very intentional choices about what any given feature or product is focusing on. And that may mean that you make somebody else less happy, or even that you piss them off. Because let's be honest, if I decide I'm building Halloween for dentists, I'm going to have a really rough evening tomorrow night. Don't worry, he's going to get plenty of candy. I want to take a moment to also talk about something that's arising a little bit in the design community in particular right now. And when I was speaking with a colleague at Box about this, she was like, I'm not too sure about personas anymore. I'm kind of thinking use cases are the way to go. And so I spent some time thinking about that. And I don't think that they are mutually exclusive. So let's talk about what a persona does and what a use case does. A persona is almost a platonic ideal of a person. It talks about where they're coming from, what their mental models are, what their biases are, what their emotions are associated with their job, and what their skills are. But it doesn't talk about an end-to-end goal about something specific, because it's supposed to be multi-purpose. By contrast, a use case is specifically about an end-to-end goal. And so they end up being complementary. First, you need to know who you're building for. But then the next question you ask is, and what is that person's goal? So I think that you want to end up using them both. But once you know who am I building for, and once you know what is their general goal, or at least have a hypothesis, how do you know you're making the right choice, and how do you embark on your design journey? And the answer, always, especially from execs, is show me the data. And all too often, that means show me the quantitative data. But I have lost track of the number of times that I'm data constrained when I'm trying to make a decision. I don't have enough data to actually make a statistically valid conclusion. And using bad data is worse than using no data at all, because you're gonna end up building something that's completely off the beaten path and totally wrong. So then you have to turn to qualitative data. But it is difficult to sell qualitative data, I think, to execs a lot of times. I've definitely seen that in the past. You need structured approaches to that qualitative data so that it is a compelling story. And so I think there are a few different tools that are particularly useful. And the first one is customer visits. Get out of the office. Visit your customer at their desk and watch them work. Don't show up with a PowerPoint presentation. Don't flash mock-ups up there. Don't sit in a conference room. Don't listen to a litany of complaints. Sure, you can set aside time to hear their concerns, but the goal of a visit is not customer support. It's to learn. And oh boy, are you going to ever learn. You're going to learn that your customers are using Excel and email and even paper to do the things that you thought they were doing in your application. You're going to learn, like I did, let's get a bigger view of this, that they are putting Post-it notes at the bottom of their monitors to remind themselves how to do things in your product. This is an actual photo of a customer visit that I did. And this one was so important, you can't really see it, but there's actually tape up there, so she had to tape it up there to make sure that it stayed long term. The Post-it sticky bit wasn't solid enough for her. And this is why when people say, well, why can't I just do a video conference or a phone call or a screen share? I say, no, there is real benefit to visiting in person. Absolutely, if there's no budget or if your customers are really far flung, then it is far better to do something not in person than to do nothing. But I never would have seen this extremely painful Post-it note if I hadn't actually been there in person, sitting with her at her desk and watching her work in the application that I was in charge of. Now, customer visits are a great way to get a general framework and understand more about how customers are approaching your product. It can be very useful also if you have a specific project in mind to ask them to work within the area that you're considering modifying. But once you're really ready to kick off a project, then there are a couple of more structured ways that I think are really helpful in gaining that feedback in a way that's both useful to you and also compelling to other key stakeholders at your company. The first one is design partners. And design partners is something that I've used for the last decade or so. And I've seen it used also to really great effect at Box since I joined. And I've only been there for about 6 weeks. But basically, you pick a set of customers to follow along with you in your design journey. You start before you've ever begun any design. You make sure you understand their perspective on the pain points. From there, share flows, rough mock-ups, interactive prototypes, beta, all the way to GA. And the great thing about this is, one, they can serve as that guide to make sure that you don't veer off course. Two, they make a great source of quotes once you actually go to general availability, which is a really awesome thing. And the other thing is, it's very easy to structure it in a way that you know you're getting reliable data. So one of the things the questions that people always ask me about this is, well, how do I know that I haven't accidentally picked a weird group of customers? So as product managers, you're going to have a pretty decent sense of which customers are especially bizarre. So pick ones that you think roughly align. And then over the course of the first 3 to 5 customers, if you're hearing roughly the same things, you can feel pretty confident that you've got it nailed down. If you start hearing wildly divergent stuff, then you need to start pulling in more and more customers. It can be a lot of work to manage like a dozen customers. I greatly admire the team at Box that actually had over a dozen design partners for one of our major releases. It definitely gets you, a little bit more data to work with. But I think even 3 to 5 is going to give you really, really good information. All right, so one other thing I want to talk about is customer advisory boards, CABs. CABs are either really, really, really helpful or completely useless for product managers. The way I've seen them be useless is if you show up in the CAB room when they're having their meeting and you show them the roadmap and a couple of mock-ups of something that's almost done, take a few questions and walk out of the room. That's not helpful. It's not helpful to them, and it's not helpful to you. Customer advisory board members are super, super engaged. They're also generally under super top secret NDA. Like a lot of them have to sign extra NDAs beyond what customers have already signed, which means it's a perfect opportunity to delve very deeply into topics that you're really not sure of. And so I want to share one of those wow moments that I had when I was at JobVite on this front. So last year, JobVite embarked on a pretty ambitious project to introduce the ability for candidates to schedule their own interviews with our customers. So the idea here is you've got the schedule of the interviewer, the schedule of the candidate, either within Outlook or within Google Calendar. You've got to intermesh them, look at availability. It's not an easy problem to solve. And so we said, you know what? We've got a CAB meeting coming up. We're going to spend a couple of hours just sitting down with them and understanding that. And we learned something amazing. Customers don't want us to automatically do the scheduling. As far as they're concerned, it's too complicated. There's people who have scheduled defensively. There are people who have blocked, people who are going on vacation, changes in interviewers. What they care about is that the candidate have the experience of automatic scheduling. So this is the candidate view here. This is the obviously much more complex scheduler view. This is what matters to them, not this. Now, if you don't need to automatically schedule the interview, and the only thing that you're focused on is making sure the candidate has a seamless experience on their end, that's a much easier initial MVP. And so we were able to build much more quickly than we would have been able to otherwise by simply stepping back from our assumptions and just asking questions and listening. And again, we hadn't done any mock-ups. These came way after that conversation. And it really turned the entire project on its head in a way that I don't think we ever would have been able to do via a survey or just via sitting down and doing brainstorming. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of those internal decisions and the frameworks that you can put together. So one of the things that I really love about being in B2B that's different from being in the consumer space is the number of internal experts that you've got. Customer success managers, account reps, salespeople, professional services. Most of that is not present within the consumer space. And they have a level of customer contact that product managers should aspire to but are never going to get to. But the thing is that they tend to remember most and think of as most important the problems that the person they talked to most recently discussed or the customer that's been yelling the loudest. And so it's really important to have frameworks in place to channel the feedback in a way that's actually constructive and useful to you as a product manager. And so there are a couple of frameworks that I've found that are really useful for this. One is at the very beginning of a project, and then one is over the lifetime of the project. So first, let's talk a little bit about pre-design reviews. Now, I originally, when I started at NetSuite and we were doing this, we were calling them design reviews. But it tends to be confusing because this is a design review with no mock-ups. This is before you've ever started ideating, and hopefully before you have a solution in mind, where you focus on what's my target market. And I can talk a little bit. I deliberately kept this a little small because this is pulled directly from a deck that I had at JobVite, so I don't want people, getting all the details. It's very old, but it's basically what are the key segments I'm focusing on. And it doesn't need to be 3, it can be 2, it can be 5, whatever it is. Who am I going to be great for? Who am I going to be good for? And who really should not be using this feature? And it's this bit that's every bit as important as that center target. Because understanding who you're going to not be building for helps you make really smart product decisions later on. Now, past that, we also say, let's identify the personas in this design review. And let's identify their journey. And I hope you can see this a little more clearly than I can this close up. But the journey is basically where they get pissed off along that goal, along that end-to-end goal of trying to accomplish a task. Where are they happy, and we can kind of, rest on our laurels there. And where do we need to improve things? So this is one model for drawing out a customer journey. It was something that resonated with the people I was working with. But there are a lot of different models out there. Now, in addition to this, these design reviews should include definition of success for the project, as well as a hypothesis around the key epics that you're going to try to tackle. Hypothesis only, don't get wedded to it. Now the key is present all of this to all of those internal stakeholders. When you've got this level of focus within each slide, when you're asking the question, do you agree with my proposed target market and with who I'm not going to be building for, you're going to get much more useful information than if you're asking the question, what do you think this product should do? How should I build this? What is the most important feature? You're going to get opinion there. Target market discussion, while it can get very vociferous and a little bit heated, tends to be much more informed off of facts or strategy of the company. Similarly, agreeing on the persona. It's something very focused, and all of these structures allow you to focus the conversation so that you don't have to worry about people kind of veering off into, well, the last customer I talked to earlier today had this to say. Now, once you've gotten everyone normed in and agreed on this, it's time to actually do the project. And from there comes the idea of core project teams. Now, a core project team is not engineering, PM, UX. That's obvious. That's a well done. It also includes people from all of those internal stakeholder groups. Someone from sales, someone from CS, maybe even people from ops, compliance, security, whatever is needed in order to understand the impact of the project across the company. And these core project teams, each individual has to commit to meeting on a regular basis, At JobVite, we did it every couple of weeks. And seeing the progress that the team is making, providing feedback on that progress, and also, and this is crucial, serving as a conduit back to their respective departments. And the key here is you've got one person with one perspective. They're useful. But the really useful thing is you as a product manager not having to go and talk to the entire sales team. So if you are talking to one person and they have committed to going back and bringing the progress back to the team, getting feedback from them and then distilling it over to you, then it's a much more useful thing and it saves you time while, again, focusing and providing a framework for the feedback. So these techniques have, I've found, produced not only better results, but also a much happier set of internal stakeholders. When I joined JobVite, the relationship between product management and all of our internal stakeholders was quite bad. Let's just leave it at that. And this was one of the things that I think really helped us rebuild trust, because they were seeing not only the end result, they were seeing the progress, and they were every bit as responsible for making sure that we didn't go off course as the product manager was. They were responsible for those regular empathy injections. Within the B2B space, we have, honestly, an unparalleled opportunity to take our empathy to the next level. I think we can all do a lot better than we traditionally have done. We can make sure that personas are embraced in all of their richness and variety and complexity, so that we understand both who we are and who we aren't building for. We can embrace qualitative research, not just quantitative research, to help us make decisions. And we can leverage those frameworks to get the right input from our customer experts so that we don't end up fearing a conversation with sales, but instead can embrace it. And if we do all this, we're going to banish that oh crap moment that I talked about at the beginning for good. Replace it with, the occasional oops moment, mostly oh wow moments. It's going to do great things for our product, and it's also going to do great things for our blood pressure.